This evening our subject is the hero mythology of the Nordic people and the Germanic peoples. And this is really a very large subject because it divides into a broad group of legendary and lore, almost any part of which could constitute a complete discussion. We will try, however, to establish certain broad patterns, and each individual will be the better if he fills in some of the material himself. There is no group of symbols that so quickly suggest interpretation or are more stimulating to the imagination and ingenuity of the thoughtful person. The Nordic mythology probably originated in Asia and was brought to the Scandinavian area by a Scythian prince called Siggi. This migration, which included a long trek across most of Europe, was accomplished sometime probably from 1 to 5 centuries before the beginning of the Christian era. Some places a little later. The dates are unobtainable. After he had established himself at Uppsala, this Prince Siggi formed a sacred college or school and gradually was transformed by lore and legendary into the deity Odin. This, however, while it answers some questions, creates more than it answers. For we know that at a comparatively early date, possibly as the development of the ritualism of a religious system required, the story of Odin took upon itself cosmological and universal implications. And whatever roots or foundations may have been historical were soon lost or totally obscured. The Nordic rites and mysteries and legends are contained in these great poetic works which we call the sagas and the Eddas. They are magnificent examples of literary achievement, rich in wonderful metered verse, deep, wise, but in their present forms not especially ancient. The compilation of these works from oral tradition was comparatively late in terms of historical antiquity. We know, however, that the content was of very much older inception. And then gradually, this lore and legendary migrated into the Teutonic states and established itself firmly along the course of the river Rhine. This transplantation of ideas naturally had psychological overtones. The Teutons had a somewhat different personal and national entity than the Nordics of the Scandinavian area. And so we find the legends and stories taking on new coloring, local atmosphere, and mingling with the hero tales already present in the Germanic folklore. The third great step in the development of our story occurs in the 19th century with the rise of the Wagnerian music drama. Richard Wagner built his great cycle of the Ring of the Nibelung upon the Sigurd Saga, the Nordic work relating to the hero of the tribe of the Volsungs, the hero of the world. Yet Wagner was by nature not one inclined merely to perpetuate an ancient law. He was a man of very involved mental and emotional structure, and he was also deeply concerned over the production of great music ritual. To achieve these ends, he took the Sigurd Saga and other related material and created what might almost be termed a Wagnerian mythology. The elements are derived from ancient sources, but the arrangements have been changed. The patterns have been readapted, and a broad and scattered group of legends have been tied into one consistent story. Yet when the work was finished, we have perhaps in the Nibelungen cycle one of the most powerful mythological developments in the entire history of man. Wagner gave us a new mythology, deeply involved in his own convictions, but with some evidence within it that it is far more than merely the ingenuity of a great artist. Wagner, in some way, captured a spirit, perhaps more effectively than the old bards, and he brought it together in one of the most unique compositions of meaning that has ever been assembled. And he strengthened and integrated this entire pattern with his music, developing a philosophy of leitmotifs, or recurring musical themes, by which he supplied a musical key to each step of the unfoldment of his story. In this, then, we have almost a new mystery ritual. And those who have seen the complete structure of the ring cannot fail to recognize a symbolic work that might almost be considered equal to the great Eleusinian mysteries and rituals of Greece or the Osirian cycle of Egypt. What has not apparently, however, been generally considered is that Wagner had as his aim the creation of a Teutonic scripture. And he divided this scripture almost as in the case of the Jewish Christian Bible. He divided it into an Old Testament and a New Testament. And his Old Testament was the ring, and his New Testament was the great cycle of the Grail. These two highly related works not only present almost identical casts of characters, but are the two necessary parts of one great pageant. The pageant that begins with the building of the wonderful house of the gods on Valhalla and ends in the temple of the Holy Grail on Montsalvat in northern Spain. The solemnity and sublimity of this cycle is obscured for most persons by the weight of the music development and by the long hours of listening and watching that are necessary. but they are most repaid if we have the patience to go through with them. Thus, in developing our story this evening, we're going to sort of crisscross between the three groups of legends in an effort to determine, if possible, certain relevant and valuable elements. We're going to have something to say about the Odin of the sagas, something about the Wotan of the Rhine, and also something about the Wotan of Wagner. For these are all different entities, although presumably the development of one concept. Our concern primarily this evening is the story of the descent of the world hero. And in this case, the emphasis is strongly and clearly indicated in the Wagnerian cycle and also in the great Sigurd cycle. For Sigurd is Siegfried, the hero of the world. Yet in bringing these related elements into one brief pageantry, Wagner has given us numerous important analogies and helped to tighten the picture, tighten the story for our use. Assuming, as we must, that the roots of the entire theory are in Asia, we are not therefore surprised to find that the universe of the sagas and Eddas is an Asiatic universe, brought into being by the same general patterns and forces that we find in the great Puranas and the creation literature of the Hindus. There are three worlds. There must always be three worlds. And in the Nordic ritual, these worlds, as in nearly all other great religious systems, constitute a spiritual universe, an invisible causal creation, or state, a vast diffusion of power. A diffusion which later becomes more or less involved in the music of the Rhine, which constantly recurs in the Wagnerian cycle, and is forever telling us of the vast patterns of space that lie behind the manifestation of things. The second universe is a universe of mind, and this mental universe is between the superior and the inferior creations. This mental universe is the servant of spirit and lord over matter. And there is a world, a mortal world, a world in which human beings, particularly the tribe of the Volsung, struggle against strange and involved fates and destinies. And the entire plan of creation is circumscribed by a strange melancholy that tells us that all that lives must die, all that is born must fade away. The gods and the heroes, the great and the small, the good and the bad, must be swallowed up, ultimately, in the twilight of the gods. It is a very nostalgic theme, and yet moving with the solemn grandeur of ritual, unfolding like a high mass. It commands our attention and consideration from the beginning. Over the whole vast mystery broods the eternal spirit of All-Father. All-Father, formless, actually nameless, without boundary or limitation, simply forever there, forever observing, never interfering, forever permitting, never denying. By his own immense and incredible silence, confounding both gods and men. For even the greatest of the immortal mortals, and the mortal immortals cannot know All-Father, nor cannot know His will. They may bear upon their lances and their spears the runes of sacred wisdom, but the mystery of allness, of the beginning and the end, of the endless ring that goes on, producing worlds from itself and returning them to itself unto everlastingness. This is all in the mystery of All-Father. And the old Nordic had no way of even brooding upon this mystery, but he sort of conceived it in a strange way as brooding upon Him, foreverness, observing Him, knowing Him, and yet he never able to remove the veil which conceals the ultimate of cause and the ultimate of effects. And in the nature and being and time of All-Father, which goes on and on and on, forever and forever, there is a vast abyss, and the depths of this no man can touch, and the substance of this no man can understand. It was like some strange cosmic fjord, cutting deep into the infinite belowness of things. For this is what the German mystic Böhme later called this and abyss, time and eternity, nothing and all. And with the same broad brush that mythologists are always permitted to paint with, this abyss was bounded upon one extremity by great cliffs of fire, and on the other extremity by great cliffs of ice. And this fire and this ice, these were forever combating together, so to say, for the heat of one and the cold of the other, caused a vast mist to form in the great abyss. And this abyss was somewhere in the infinite nature of All-Father. And the fire was the fire of All-Father, and the cold and the ice were also His. For He in some way was master of light and darkness, heat and cold. Some have suggested that these ancient peoples were trying to work with the concept of the duality of electricity and magnetism, polarization in space. We cannot say, but it certainly sounds as though they were thinking in that way. And from all time, there were also great giants. For there were giants upon the earth or in the worlds of those days. And those at the north were the giants of ice, glistening and gleaming with bodies made of glaciers. And those at the south were giants of fire, reaching out flaming arms and howling and shrieking in the incredible combustions. And these giants hurled ice and fire into the great depths. And the name of the great deep, the cleft that went on forever, was Gunungagat. And here, as a result of the minglings of frost and fire, rose great clouds of hoarfrost, immense, strange, frosty mists. And these whirled and swirled and twisted and turned through the ages, until gradually they formed themselves into a strange shape. And this shape was that of a giant, an immense and incredible being, who filled the whole of space like some vast embryo within the womb. A giant composed of fire and ice, of heat and cold, of light and darkness, of life and death. And the name of this giant was Ema, and he had one eye. And he writhed and twisted and turned in this great uterine abyss. And in the course of time, this great giant became like a world, vast and immense. And from his frosty and icy surfaces, things began to grow and to live. And then again, by that broad stroke, which we cannot account for, there wandered from we know not where, because there is no record to tell us, the last thing we would assume to be present under such conditions. And that was a kindly, gentle cow. And this cow was called the Great Mother. And this Great Mother perhaps is Hathor, the cow goddess of Egypt. Perhaps she is any one of the mysterious beast deities which we find in ancient times. All we know about the Great Cow Mother was that she was forever in need of salt. But without salt, she could not live. That is the reason the Roman soldiers were paid their salaries, because the word salary means salt, and was necessary for their keeping, and later it became a little confused with good Roman coinage, but it was still the salt of salvation, without which man could not live, in this case his wages. But the cow mother was in great need of salt. And so while she was wandering around upon this strange frosty body of Ymir, seeking salt, she began to lick the ice. And with her great moist, warm tongue, she was seeking salt. But instead of salt, she licked out of the ice 3 sleeping gods, who had been resting there from no one knows when. And the most important to us of these gods that was brought out of the ice was Odin the All-Father. Not the supreme being, not the great one, but the first of the gods. And Odin, with his brothers who were also licked from the ancient ice, turned upon the hoarfrost giant, their eternal father, Ymir, and slew him. And from the body of Ymir, the great primordial being, these gods fashioned the world. And they fashioned the world by raising up the skull of Ymir and formed of it the bowl of heaven. And they also then called upon 4 little elemental dwarfs to come to their assistance: Ordri, Sudri, Nordri, and Vestri, from which we have north, east, south, and west, and they placed these at the corners of the skull to hold it up. Then they took the body of Ymir and they formed the earth. And they took his hair and they made vegetation. And the body began to rot. And out of the rotting of the body crawled all kinds of living things, tiny lives, living out of putrefaction. And these slowly populated the earth and grew and increased until they became species and tribes and ultimately races of beings. And in this great world that was formed from the body of Ymir, they took his eyebrows and they put them around the edge of the world so that men would not fall off. And they called this great flat disk which they had fashioned Midgard. And in order to further protect everything, the gods placed around this the Midgard serpent, a great serpent that dwelled in the bottom of ocean, an ocean extended from land to the eyebrows of Ymir. And in the bottom of the ocean was this great serpent, who was as large and long as the distance around the earth, so that it remained forever with its tail in its mouth, the symbol of the serpent of eternity. And this serpent sometimes was angry, and sometimes it writhed and twisted in the bottom of the ocean, causing storms and earthquakes and all kinds of strange and terrible phenomena. Now we have something else that comes in this pattern also. When Odin, who had brought all these things about and had fashioned his creatures according to his own kind, realized that the time had come to bring order out of chaos. He caused a tree to be planted in the lowest parts of the body of Ymir. And this tree, like the spinal cord of a giant, grew up through the three worlds and became the tree Yggdrasil, the tree of existence, the tree of the world and of life. And all things that lived upon this tree, and around the midst of the tree was placed this great disk which we call the earth. And in the midst of this earth there rose a mountain, and this mountain was called the Mountain of the Gods. And here, Odin, calling upon all the elemental powers and forces of nature, whom Wagner later introduces under the name of the great giants, builds his castle, his palace, his throne of rulership, the magnificent hall of judgment and of counsel, which is called Asgard. And here, with his gods, forming together the sacred circle of 12 like the Olympian deities, Odin ruled his world, his universe. And from a great throne on the very peak of his palace he gazed out upon all things, and was ever mindful, like Zeus, of everything that happened in the world. And he had ravens that went forth to all corners of space and brought him messages. And then also on the great slopes of the mountain of the gods he built the glorious palace of Valhalla. And this great wonderful palace was made of the shields of heroes upheld by the spears of conquerors. It was the place of feasting of the blessed dead, and those who died in the defense of the gods, or nobly and worthily upon the field of battle, were picked up by the Valkyrie, the virgin daughters of Odin, and carried by them upon their 8-footed steeds to the wonderful banquet hall of Valhalla. Here, according to the legends, we had a real Nordic paradise, where men fought all day, their wounds were healed at sunset, and they feasted all night. The next morning they were all ready to fight again. What could be a more cozy and truly earth-like situation? I think it should have been set here instead of elsewhere, because that is about our way of life in a large symbolical picture. It makes little difference whether we're fighting industrially or economically or from a militant standpoint. It's struggle for food in order that we may eat to struggle some more. Now, also in the preparation of this universe, the tree went down far below the surface of the Midgard world of men into a strange primordial darkness beneath, which was called Helheim, from which we have our word hell. But in their case, the word did not imply hot as it does with us, but cold. And when some missionaries went to the Eskimos, they had to do the same thing with the Christian concept, because a fiery perdition was too inviting and suggested sin to these frozen souls. But down in the bottom of this abyss were also at the roots of the tree of life, which was rooted in the strange residue, the strange decomposition of the body of Ymir, at the very bottom of the great Ginnungagap in which the tree grew. At the roots of this tree, fate, the mysterious power of destiny to which even Odin must bow, placed a great host of worms, horrible little eating, gnawing things, with all the best attributes of a California termite. The purpose of these worms was to gnaw through the roots of the world tree, kill it, and destroy it forever. And also down in this same abyss was a stream, a stream that flowed like the waters of Lethe through the underworld, and also like the waters of Mnemosyne were the abodes of memory. And this stream poured into a pool, and this pool was under the keeping of a strange ancient god of fates, a god so old that, inconsistent as it may be, he was not included among the creations that Odin made, even though Odin was supposed to have begun it all. This god was nothing but a huge face, a strange, immense, melancholy, icy countenance, gazing forever out over the rim of the pool which he guarded. And this god was named Mimir, and this was his pool, and it was the pool of memory. And Odin, having set his world in such order as he could, and still burdened with all the doubts and misgivings that attend creativity in almost any field, especially in so large and arbitrary an undertaking, realizing that he had fashioned a world without knowing why, that he had created something without the sanction of Allfather because he did not know what Allfather meant. Odin did not know where he had come from. He did not know when he was born because he was a grown man when he was licked out of the ice for the great cow. He knew nothing of his own origin. He knew nothing of his own destiny. Therefore, realizing that unless we know origin and destiny, we can never survive, Odin went down to the source of all wisdom, the great glazy face of Mimir, in the darkness of the subconscious, of the unconscious, of the deepest and most profound roots of the self. And Mimir listened to the cry of the god, and told him very frankly that if he wished wisdom in addition to all his other glories, he must make a great sacrifice for it. And Odin swore upon his spear that he would make any sacrifice. And Mimir said, all right, if you want wisdom, then pluck out one of your own eyes and cast it into my pool. And without a moment's hesitation, Odin plucked out an eye and cast it into the pool of Mimir. And it was then that Mimir whispered to him the secrets of the runes, or the great laws of Allfather. And he told him many wonderful things, but he refused to tell Odin his own origin or his own destiny. These he could not and would not tell. But Odin, having received all other things, and having cut the runes or the sacred characters into his spear shaft, returned again to the upper world. There brooded longer over the mystery of it all. Resolved to go further, he listened to the voice of oracles and to whispers that came to him out of the great mystery of space, that if a man would live forever, he must die. And only those who gave their lives could keep them, and those who lost their lives in the search of truth would regain them into everlastingness. He had already given an eye, because if his eye was single, his body was filled with light. Now he was asked by the mysterious voices of the ancients to give more, to die for life. So Odin went out upon the branches of the great tree Yggdrasil, and there hanged himself. And he hung there, but he did not die. And further wisdom and further understanding was given to him, and he survived the ordeal and was rescued and lived after having resolved to die. The gods also whispered to him that he could not die until the great day had come. So Odin learned that he could not die, that he could only wait. And in waiting, he completed all the wisdom that it was possible for him to possess. But in addition to wisdom, Odin had other factors that might contribute. For on this tree, the great Yggdrasil tree, there lived squirrels. And these squirrels formed a wonderful communication system. They would run up to the gods and listen outside the door of Valhalla, where they could hide in the doorways and peek under the doors, and got all the scandal. They then rushed down the tree to the roots where the demons were and told them all about it. Then they watched and listened until the demons and the spirits and the mysterious beings of the underworld, the creatures that lived in Elfheim and all these deep places, until they learned all the secrets from these. Then the squirrels ran up again and whispered it to the gods and kept everything more or less in a state of constant pandemonium. There is another interesting situation that comes, and that is that although Odin apparently was the first of the gods, he had to fight for his throne. He had to fight against something that suddenly looms out to us as older than he was. For somewhere in this mystery, there was a still more ancient deity. A deity who had long and primordially ruled in space and in chaos. And this being was Thor the Thunderer, the mysterious deity who had the power over the lightnings, and who carried in his hand a great hammer. And whenever he threw this hammer, it was like a boomerang. It struck its object and then returned to him again. And this hammer was in the form of a cross. And with this he overcame and destroyed all evil monsters. And at one time he even tried to capture the Midgard snake that encircled the earth. But the serpent was so great that it pulled the bottom out of the boat on which Thor was standing. But this Thor was a mighty man of ancient times, a mighty force. And it was finally necessary for Odin to come into combat with Thor. He did not destroy him, but by the power of the runes and of magic and of the wisdom of Mimir, he overcame Thor and accepted him into his order of gods. And Thor became the faithful servant of the new order of deities. By this time we begin to see that the universe is more or less in order. And we see Odin presiding over the great council. But also we observe, even in these early days, that tragedy is ever near. In order to build his great castle at Asgard, Odin had made a pact with the giants. He had promised to give them a great treasure, the goddess of beauty. But when the palace was finished, he broke his word and did not do what he had promised. Later, according to the Wagnerian cycle, he paid these giants with the treasure of the Nibelung, which had also been dishonestly acquired. And Odin came under a curse. And this curse gradually descended through ages of time, because an evil thing had been done. And this evil of broken honor would ultimately destroy all of the gods and their world and everything that pertained to it. Now, in order to keep the wonderful world of the gods happy and beautiful, Odin created out of himself another deity, his beloved son. And this beloved son was certainly the Christ hero of the Nordic peoples. He was called Balder the Beautiful. He was happiness, joy, peace, love. In all things, he was the ideal of everything that was different from the strange, rugged, old gods who had